Welcome to another episode of EQ Unlocked, where we talk about emotional intelligence, the nervous system regulation. Today, we're going to talk about something it impacts a lot of people. And regardless if they realize it or not, it's important. It's important to really recognize. It's important for your growth. It's important for your happiness. It's important for your clarity. And so today, we're going to talk about why new people activate you. So a lot of people hear that word activate, and they might be lost by what I mean. They might be confused. Well, what is he talking about activation? And so what I mean by activation is just a sense of uncertainty within your body. And now here's the kicker, right? Emotional activation is actually just information. Regulation, well, that creates the self-awareness that comes with that activation. And so we're going to get into it. We're going to get into it. So let's do it. So have you ever met someone and suddenly just felt different? Maybe you were more anxious. Maybe you were more insecure. Maybe you were more energized, more defensive, more inspired. I've certainly felt all these ways before. And it just depended on the person and, situation and things like that. But what I come to realize is that with each activation I felt, there was information. There was information about me. There was information about my past. And there was information about what was driving the choices that I was making in those moments with those interactions with those people. And, new people don't just enter our lives. They actually interact with our nervous system and our conditioning. And so, I think about times in my life where I met somebody and, I always dealt with fear very differently. And I shouldn't say always, but later in life, I dealt with my fear very differently. It probably started when I was about 31, 32. And I guess I had just survived so much at that point that I was done being afraid. And so, well, at least I like to trick myself into thinking that I was done being afraid. What was actually happening is when I would get afraid, I would get extremely cocky. I would get extremely arrogant. And truth be told, that was just my fear trying to protect me. And it was trying to protect my ego. And it was trying to keep me safe in that moment. And so that's kind of where this awareness started at for me, is just seeing that and recognizing like, oh, when I get afraid, get cocky. Sometimes what I came to realize is sometimes people don't create reactions in us. They simply reveal them. So the question becomes, it isn't just why do they affect me, but the deeper question is what is this interaction showing me about myself? And so I want to make sure I'm clear about this, right? Activation is not a bad thing. Again, I go back to the point that it's simply information. And so a lot of times we like to judge things. We like to put our own mindset on things. Oh, well, when I feel this way, it must mean something bad. Or when I feel this way, it must mean X, Y, or Z. But again, it's information. And that's not to say feelings aren't real and things of that nature. But what it is saying is that when you're activated, it's not a weakness. You see, the nervous system actually reacts before your conscious thought. And so triggers, they actually reveal unresolved patterns. They reveal fears. They reveal desires. Sometimes they reveal beliefs. And so certain times in my life, I would see somebody else, especially men, and I would see something in those men that I just couldn't stand. I absolutely abhorred it, right? If a man was super cocky or super arrogant, or if he was threatening, or if I seen him as a bully, it made me angry. It really activated something deep within inside me. The truth is what I came to realize is that the reason it was so activating for me was that those were the parts of myself that I didn't like. You see, that activation was information. And some examples of this might be like confidence, triggering your insecurity. It might be, somebody being emotionally available to you and it triggering a sense of distrust in you. It might be distance triggering pursuit, calmness feeling unfamiliar or unsafe. And again, these things might seem very strange because they seem like polar opposites. But when you sit down and you look and you ask yourself these questions, well, what am I trying to achieve right now, right? Or what feeling am I trying not to feel? Therein lies a lot of the answers that are linked to that nervous system activation. Our bodies, they often recognize patterns before our mind can explain them. And so, there was a situation that I had rather recently, and I was afraid. I was really afraid. And with this fear, instead of sitting down and just trying to figure out where these feelings of anxiousness came from, I became so activated so quickly that I ended up just running away. And so I knew that there was a problem for me. I didn't understand what the problem was. I didn't understand what in me was activated. I just knew something was, and I had to figure it out. And so, one thing I've been exploring through NALS is how awareness begins with recognizing changes before they actually become behaviors. They start costing me something. And again, so, regulation, awareness, choice, right? When I'm regulated, I look at things completely different than I do when I'm activated. And when I'm regulated and I can have that awareness, I now make choices that benefit my relationships rather than hurt them. And so there is a huge difference between regulation and reaction. Regulation isn't suppression, right? A lot of times we think that we tie regulation or feeling calm or feeling safe into suppression. If I just don't think about this thing, if I just don't think about this thing that bothers me or that hurts me, then I'm fine, right? That's not regulation, that's suppression. That's burying it. And so you guys have all heard that I used to be 500 pounds. And the truth is that I was 500 pounds, not because I was lazy. I wasn't 500 pounds because well, actually, I can't say that. I was going to say because I didn't have discipline, but I definitely didn't have discipline. But the bigger problem is that I used to suppress my feelings with food. And so every time I felt something uncomfortable, I would eat it away. And so now, currently, one of the first things I do when I want to go grab something to eat, especially like just snacking randomly, I ask myself, am I hungry? Or am I just trying not to feel this thing that I'm feeling? And you might be saying to yourself, well, okay, well, that's you. But it happens with a lot of different things. People do it with shopping. People do it with sex. People do it with drugs. People do it with alcohol. It's very different it's all very much the same because you're trying to suppress the things that you don't want to feel. And of course, there's nothing wrong with having a drink because you want to just relax or because you enjoy it. Very different from the person who's doing it to not feel the thing that they don't want to feel. Regulation creates space between the feeling and the behavior. And so, I don't want you to think about regulation as being perfect, as though you never say anything off the cuff or you never feel any kind of way. That would be a lie, right? Because you're going to. But what regulation does is it gives you that little bit of space so that behavior doesn't make your life worse. So you don't hurt the people you care about. So that you deal with your customers at work in a manner that benefits yourself and them. That's what regulation is all about. It's just creating that space. If you're a parent, I was actually having this conversation with my daughter just earlier today. And I asked her, I said, kid, do you ever remember a time when I was mad at you or that you got in trouble? She looked at me and said, no, I don't think you did. I don't remember that. Now this child lived with me for 5 years. Okay. And she was actually, I'm sorry, not 5 years, 4 years. And this was going into middle school. We all know how tough those times are, right? And so I started thinking to myself, well, why was it that she never made me angry? Because I too couldn't recall a time where she got in trouble or she made me angry. And I'm definitely not that passive parent who just lets her do whatever she wants to. I'm definitely not that guy. But I said, certainly you're not perfect. And that's not real. So what's the problem? And so in our conversation, what I came to realize is that while I wasn't regulated in every other area of my life, when it came to her, being regulated meant the most. Because I knew if I wasn't regulated, she wouldn't feel safe enough to talk to me. She wouldn't feel safe enough to express her concerns and to be honest with me. So even though I didn't realize it at the time, that regulation that she had or that I had, especially in reference to her, was intentional. It was controlled. It was purposeful, right? But unfortunately, that didn't spread across the board of my entire life. That was specific to her at that time. And so what I learned is I started really looking at this in my relationship with her is that my dysregulation toward a lot of other things in my life in that point, it created projection. It created impulsivity. It created fantasy. It created shutdown. It even created over-identification. I can't tell you how many times that I over-texted. I emotionally withdrew. I was focused on people-pleasing or hyper-analyzing or obsession or avoidance, But that was all dysregulation. I recall this one time, her mother sent me a message. When she sent me this message, I pulled over to respond because her mother activated something in me so much that I couldn't even respond until I pulled over. And that wasn't a one-off. That was a pretty normal thing. Again, looking at my life, I can tie that back to the trauma of losing my first daughter. And I wasn't going to do that again, right? So I did everything that I could to protect that, my relationship with Journey. But the problem is that I was completely dysregulated while I was doing it. And so I pull over, and I drop Journey off at school. I pull over to respond to her mom's message. And I was so focused, and I was so analyzing every word that she wrote and every word that I wrote. And I was so focused on my phone that I hear a knock at my window. I lift my head up, and there's 3 police officers standing around my car. My head was down for so long typing that message that they thought I overdosed. So that's how deep dysregulation can run, right? And of course, they realized that nothing was wrong. I explained to them about the text message, and they understood. But the problem is that I couldn't see how abnormal that was at the time. I wasn't able to see what dysregulation was actually costing me. And so unregulated emotion seeks immediate relief. Regulated awareness seeks understanding. And so, when I'm sending her mom this message, I'm trying to get relief. I'm not worried about understanding. I'm worried about getting relief. However, after I started regulating myself, I started looking at the situation, trying to understand where she was coming from. And so that was just one example. But the same can be true of any area of life. You get that stimulus, you experience a state change, you interpret it, and then you respond. And that can be relationships. That can be something happening at work. Let's say you've had bad work experiences, right? Experiences where you weren't always treated fairly. And so your boss comes up to you and he makes a comment. Oh, well, you really dropped the ball on that project. That can immediately change your state. You interpret him as now threatening your job. And now you respond according to the thought that you're being threatened. And that's what dysregulation does. And bring it home. We can do the same thing with our children. Our children can as they get older, we like to often keep in our mind or think in our mind that they're not becoming their own individuals. And so when they start making choices as their own individuals, a lot of us don't know how to handle that. And we think to ourselves, well, how dare they make these decisions? And then we might interpret that as disrespect. And so we respond to their autonomy and their growth and their development from our state of feeling disrespected, rather than looking at our children as young people who are becoming their own people. You see, most people think relationships are about compatibility. A lot of the time, they're actually about regulation. And that doesn't matter what relationship we're talking about. It doesn't matter if it's your girlfriend, your boyfriend, your children, your boss. If you're regulated, all those conversations go a lot differently. But new people, they can teach us something about ourselves that we don't really know or may not be aware of at this very moment. New people can reveal unmet needs. They can reveal hidden fears. They can reveal suppressed ambition or emotional wounds, a longing for connection, dormant confidence, identity instability. Someone disciplined, they might expose your avoidance. Someone emotionally expressive, they might expose your suppression. Someone grounded, they might expose internal chaos. Someone authentic, they might expose performative behavior. And so when you look at these things, it's, again, information, data, rather than a threat, and you can look at it with curiosity. Again, from a regulated state, well, you start to see yourself and the world very differently. Because I can tell you from personal experience, when you start looking at the world through this lens, people become a lot less threatening to you. Because even people you don't like, they're teaching you something about yourself. And so there's a young man at work, and his name is Brandon. And so Brandon's mom, she makes these his mother-in-law makes these health shakes, right? And so Brandon was coming in with these health shakes, and he's a health shake hustling fool, boy. I tell you, that man was selling more health shakes. He was selling them like it was a product everybody needed. And when I seen him, man, I got in my feelings about it. I got mad. I wasn't mad at him, but I recognized that this thing that he was doing, it was activating something in me. And so I started thinking about the situation and analyzing. And I'm like, well, why is this thing that he's doing activating something in me? And so what I realized through looking at the situation, through evaluating it honestly, is that what he was activating in me was my fear of selling, my lack of ambition, right? He was activating in me something that was holding me back. And so then I had to, of course, dig deeper and figure out what it was that was holding me back. But the information I received from seeing him sell these protein shakes was the information I needed to make the adjustment in my mindset, so I could actually get out there and start selling NALS programs again. so I could get out there and start telling companies about ORS. It was that situation that really helped me to be aware of what was actually taking place. And so some people, they trigger your wounds, others trigger your potential. And so I got a question for you. What if the activation isn't punishment? What if it's just information? And so there's opportunity within the activation. Regulation allows observation without collapse. It allows connection without self-abandonment. It allows emotional honesty without impulsive action. And so there's, you know, a practical reflection practice that I use, and I maybe you'll use it for yourself. I don't know. But again, once you're regulated, once you've reached that point of regulation, ask yourself, what am I feeling physically? Name it. What emotion is here? Trace it back. What belief or fear might this connect to? And then choose. What response aligns with who I want to become? You know, we have to be brave enough to ask ourselves these questions. If we really want change, we have to be brave enough to actually do the work. You see, awareness without regulation overwhelms people. Regulation, well, that creates the capacity to learn from yourself. And so there's always a broader application to everything I say. Yeah, I've talked about parenting, I've talked about relationships, but these same principles apply to leadership. They apply to business, they apply to team dynamics, they apply to friendships, to family systems, to networking, to public visibility. And again, I know because I've experienced all these things. You know, there was a time not too many months ago that I'm sitting in a room with billionaires, literally, and something in me is being activated, right? And I learned from all of those people. I learned from every last one of those people that was in that room something about myself. And so I look at my friendships and my relationships, and I learned something about myself there too. When this person activates something in me, what is that telling me about me? Sometimes it's telling me that I'm not being honest with myself. Sometimes it's telling me that, you know, I need to do better as a son, as a father, as an employee. Sometimes it's just telling me I need to get out there and help other people. But I have to pay attention to the activation, and I have to be curious about where it's coming from. Because if I just let it dysregulate me, if I just let it make me upset or anxious or angry or afraid, well, in those states, I'm not learning anything from the situation. I have to be regulative. And so in leadership and organizational environments, unregulated activation affects communication, trust, decision-making, and adaptability constantly. You know, a lot of leaders are aware that they need emotional intelligence. A lot of leaders are aware of that. As a matter of fact, they pay a lot of money to develop emotional intelligence. But if you're a business leader or you have some type of role in some type of organization, I want you to ask yourself, how much more would your employees benefit from being regulated? How would your company benefit from your employees being regulated, from them developing emotional intelligence on a daily basis, right? And that's why I created ORS, because I seen a bunch of people who needed help, who may not be able to afford it. But I saw companies who could certainly afford it and who would gain from helping their employees develop it. And so not every activation is danger. Not every emotional shift means something is wrong. Sometimes new people, new circumstances, they reveal the next layer of growth. The goal isn't to stop feeling activated. The goal is to become aware enough that activation becomes information instead of identity. As always, I appreciate you guys following, liking, sharing, subscribing. If this episode resonated with you, I created a self-awareness resource around regulation and relational patterns at MatthewFStevens.com. You can explore it there. Again, I appreciate you guys joining me. I appreciate you, being a part of this process and tuning into EQ Unlocked. I ask that you continue to like, share, subscribe, follow. And as always, good friends, be amazing, be you.
As this episode comes to a close, take a moment to notice what stood out for you. Emotional intelligence isn't about having all the answers. It's about building awareness, understanding yourself and the people around you, and choosing how you respond, especially when things feel difficult. Growth happens through reflection and practice. not pressure or perfection. If this conversation supported you, consider sharing it with someone who may benefit from it as well. To explore more tools and resources around emotional intelligence and personal development, connect with EQ Unlocked and Nulls. Until next time, remember, better awareness leads to better choices, and better choices lead to a better life. This is EQ Unlocked.